Council meeting to order. If everyone can please rise for a moment of reflection and Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson? Mrs. Hoover? Here. Ms. Royce? I'm here. Mrs. Bowling?
Here.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Here.
Mr. Girton?
Here.
Mr. Brayton?
Here. Thank you. We have 6 members present this evening. On to amendment of agenda. We only have one, and that is adding a letter regarding holding a public hearing for an ordinance amending Part 11 of Planning and Zoning Code. That will be communication, yes, that will be communication number 11 this evening. Mrs. Winterbauer.
I make a motion to amend the agenda as stated.
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to amend the agenda as stated. Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can you repeat exactly what you are adding to the agenda?
Yes, it is an email that I received just before 5 o'clock this evening, asking for council to basically, well, we'll get to that, setting a public hearing for the purpose of amending Part 11 of Planning and Zoning Code relating to smoking, chewing, electronic smoking, vaping, retail product establishments to promote clarity and consistency in policy interpretation, and by directing these types of retail business establishments to appropriate locations and other related changes.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Welcome. Any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce? I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
Mr. Brayton?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to public hearings. Can I see your agenda? And this is a notice of public hearing regarding the petition for the creation of the Factory 52 Community Authority. Notice is hereby given that the Norwood City Council, Hamilton County, Ohio, will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, November 12th, 2024 at 7:30 p.m. Second floor, Council Chambers, 4645 Montgomery Road, Norwood, Ohio, 45212. Persons interested in being heard regarding the proposed petition for the creation of the Factory 52 Community Authority will be afforded the opportunity to be heard during the public hearing. The text of the proposed petition is available for public inspection in the office of the Clerk of Council, Monday through Friday, between the hours of 1 p.m. and 5 p.m. I will go ahead and declare this public hearing open. Anyone to speak in favor of this matter, if you want to please state your name and come forward to the microphone. Anyone to speak in favor of this matter?
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Andrew Sport. I'm an attorney for PLK Communities. Not so much here to speak in favor of, just to offer the opportunity that if anyone has any questions of a legal nature concerning the petition process, from our perspective, we'd be happy to answer those questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak in favor of this matter? Anyone to speak against this matter?
Hello. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. I'm Marilyn Hanrahan, 2257 Monroe Avenue. I was on council when PLK first brought their plans to the city. We were all excited to see this property, finally having somebody come in and having a good use of this property. Factory 52 has been, in my opinion, a wonderful and highly successful development. Proof of that success is in its expansions. I'm also confident that during the planning phase, the developers accounted for upkeep and maintenance costs in their financial analysis. So there is no need to impose a 2% tax that ultimately benefits a private, for-profit business for their upkeep and maintenance. I actually also want to add that I think the city should be looking into an impact fund from PLK. As customers, we shouldn't be burdened with a hidden fee that most people won't even realize that they are paying. This proposed 2% fee would essentially function as a hidden tax. The city and its citizens will see absolutely no benefit from this tax. If this passes, PLK should be required to post visible notices informing all customers they are charging customers a 2% fee to shop, eat, or play at their property. Also, I ask you to consider, if you approve this hidden tax here, what's to stop other developments in Norwood from doing the same thing? You'll be opening a Pandora's box to unintended consequences. This isn't fair to our residents or our customers. I'm also wondering, and I believe Keith can answer this, or I'm sorry, Mr. Moore can answer this, who will be administering and collect the fees? I believe it's the state, but I don't know anymore. Finally, I hate to even say this, but looking at tonight's agenda, it's really sad because it seems this hearing is merely procedural, held only because it's required. Resolution 5 of the agenda for tonight already calls for organizing the Factory 52 Community Authority, which suggests the decisions have already been made. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak against the matter?
I'm not against it. Thank you, President. I'm not against it so much as the language that's in the document. In the state code, it uses the word shall every time for a member of that board. But in this one, it says should. Well, should isn't even will, and especially isn't shall. So 3 years from now, that board may decide how they're going to elect themselves. And the city, right now, the city gets to put 3 people on and 1 that's directly from the city. The other 3 are members of the community. When they finally decide what they're going, how they're going to organize, 3 years from now, the city may have no input at all. So I just have a disagreement with the word should in there. And I don't know which would take precedent, the state code or what is in there. And I might have a misunderstanding about this, but I thought that PLK turned the property, the land, over to Port Authority so they could get some financial advantage, get some bonds or grants, whatever, that they didn't have to pay taxes on. So if this document says that the directors are the people to deal with, and it turns out later that it was the Port Authority, does that mean that this document is invalid? Okay, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
I'm sorry, for the record, could you state your name?
Rodney Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Anyone else to speak against this matter?
Good evening. I'm all for the advancement of our community, especially one project in particular that has prioritized diversity. Now, I applaud that. In fact, I remember walking the grounds when it was just dirt, no roads or anything of that nature, no businesses put in the food hall. Guys, I'm just concerned about people who are disenfranchised. A lot of people are disenfranchised because of the protocols that they believe are in place. I came a couple of weeks ago where I saw council members openly admitting they had literally just got it moments earlier. I just think when we do something like this, we need to not only let the residents know, but make sure that the business owners within that development also clearly understand, hey, there may be changes coming and why. Change isn't always a bad thing. Look at our community, right? But when we talk about serving people, we've got to, in my opinion, just do it differently. I'm not standing totally against PLK, and I think those that run the development know that, but I'm not happy with the protocols that we still seem to allow to surface. And to one of our other community members' point, when we do it this way, folks, it says to those disenfranchised residents that why would I even get involved? They're going to do what they want to do anyway. And it makes it look like the decisions have already been made when we continue to use the protocols that I've seen in Norwood for over 20 years. And I'm just encouraging us, including the development and their whole team, let's continue to thrive and grow and build. But if we don't have people on the team that can think like grassroots type people, you got a ton of them right here in the community that'll help you. All you have to do is reach out, because I don't want our residents to always feel like, here we go again. We're making tremendous strides in this community, and I'll go down with the ship telling everybody that, because I believe that. It's true. But our protocols, how we do things and how we allow others to do what they do, it just keeps reeking that we're going to do what we want to do, how we want to do it, and when. And at some point, we've got to just stop that. I eat at Factory 52. I'll continue to eat at Factory 52. I'll continue to tell others to go there. But when it comes down to decision making, this is a private corporation. Either they've got to plan it out well in advance, or just make sure people have an opportunity to know why they made the changes and when that came to be a possibility. And that would be my challenge to the lawyers and to all of those that have an input on this. Because like Ms. Hanrahan said, I personally don't like people getting a tax 2% or 0.5%, and they didn't get enough fair notice that it's coming. And for that, I don't like that. And I don't think that furthers our agenda as a community moving forward. Please pray over it, consider it, and let's make sure that every voice is at the table and every voice has a right to be heard. God bless you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak against this matter? Anyone else to speak against the matter? Seeing as there are none, I will go ahead and declare this public hearing closed. Moving on to next item is request to address council. And the first is Charlene Myers.
Good evening. I'm Charlene Myers, and I know I've addressed council before, and thank you for allowing me to do it again.
I work for an organization, as I've shared with you, called Focus, and what Focus stands for, which I never shared with you, is food, occupation, clothing, understanding, and shelter. And that's really the mission of what we're trying to accomplish. So far in Norwood, we've served about 80 meals a month to Norwood residents. About 80% of the people that we're seeing are from Norwood. We see people who are living on the street, people who are just fine, but want to come in for, community gathering, and that's really just a very special thing that is happening. Next year, we're going to start serving 2 meals a month, one on Sunday and one on the same Thursday that we're serving. We're also looking for ways to kind of increase what we're doing. One of the things that struck me was the cold, and what happens in the cold to our neighbors in need. And so we're going through a process of looking for ways to have a warming center in Norwood, and going through that process. So as we go through that process, I'll keep council aware. We also have 2 special events that are happening in December, and I encourage you, if you want to get involved, I could send you a link. We're doing a giving tree with Norwood View School. So far, we have about 85 kids that are signed up. The price of the gifts are only $30, and some of them have put some very interesting things and some wonderful things on their wish. I will send you all the link if you want to participate. I need the presents wrapped with the child's name on it by December 1st, if that's possible. And the last thing we're doing is we are doing a ham give out, where we're giving people a ham and a pie. They're signing up for that. Through our friends with Ashland Pantry and through our meals, we are having people sign up to get a Christmas ham and a pie. So hopefully, again, we can address the needs of the citizens of Norwood. And all of the people that are coming, they either have to live in Norwood or they're going to have to get to Norwood, because we're going to be at Ashland Avenue. So thank you very much, and thank you for allowing me to address council.
Thank you. Next request to address council is Bishop Sonny James.
Good evening, again, and thank you all. Thank you, Mr. President, for an opportunity to speak. There's been a lot of stuff going on lately. I'm so excited that we had our 2nd annual commemorative march honoring the life and legacy of Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, and it was phenomenal. And at the end of it, we had dignitaries and folks, nonpartisan, parading to the polls, and they voted. And one of the things that we have been doing a lot of with our organization is really just talking to a lot of people. And I'm telling you all, I cannot begin to tell you how many people in our community is still disenfranchised. And so we just want to step up our efforts to make sure that people know that they are a part of the process. And this is our, I don't know how many events we've done now, maybe 7. And one of the common conversations is, Bishop, we leave our community and come to Norwood. Well, where's Norwood? And the day before our march, I traveled to Springfield, Ohio, where I stood with the leadership of that community. And it was so beautiful to be able to talk to the mayor and to talk to the chief of police there, and to see the chief literally almost in tears saying, Bishop, this is so phenomenal that you and your group would come here and stand with us. And one of the police officers said, wow, this is incredible that you guys would come here to be with us. And just days ago, you had people walking this very spot that you're walking on with AK-47s. And so many people are afraid, but you guys aren't. You guys have heard me say, as I close, you've heard me say about our youth crime and gun intervention initiative. Well, we're going to be coming, and again, I'm pro-Norwood, so we're coming to Norwood. And you guys know that we haven't had one incident in any of our events. But the one thing that we're lacking is Norwood. Just tonight, I was at another meeting, and at the end of the mayor's speech, dignitaries, nonpartisan, rushed up and said, Bishop, what's our next step? When I leave here now, I'm going to rush over and meet with the sheriff and their group. And they're all saying, what's our next step? We have a plan. But I want Norwood to represent Norwood. So I'm labeling this, titling this, heading this, let's not talk about it, let's be about it. And we're going to bring folk to Norwood, and we're going to go right to the streets where there have been complications and things like that. We want a safe community. You want a safe community. But the one thing that we're missing, and the peers see it, that's Norwood. Sure, when dignitaries show up and the cameras show up, people have a tendency to show up, but people ask me all the time, Bishop, are you aware? Bishop, are they working with you? Now, I'm not going to lie for anybody or lie on anybody. So let's end that. When you hear about this next initiative, jump on in. And I do want to acknowledge our city councilman that did come and show up. I also want to acknowledge Mr. Braden, who every time we have an event, he talks to me weeks in advance, and when he has travel plans, I mean, you can't change that. I get that.
Thank you.
But where are the rest of them? When do you reach out and say, hey, I'm interested? Other people are watching, and I don't want other mayors and chiefs, police chiefs to come to Norwood. They leave their community to come to us, and you all aren't even present. So please, let's help us really represent and show off Norwood. And I want to give a hats off to our fire chief, phenomenal human being. Again, he communicates when he's out of town and can't be there. But I don't want to be at our next event lined up with tons of police chiefs and tons of mayors, and we don't have our own. Now, in honor to our mayor at our first commemorative march, he was right there every step of the way. I mean, he made every step. He walked better than I did. His wife even was with us, so I honor him for that. But as we move forward, please, let's not let other people show off. Let's show off our community ourselves. So when you hear about it, let's not just talk about it. Let's be about it. And when you do see me publicly, the old me would call you out and blast you out publicly if you didn't speak and say hi. You know, I'm blessed to be alive. So I'm humbled, and I want to treat all of you with fairness and respect. I know, looking at Mr. President, the clock is, even though it's not there, it's there. So I respectfully sit down. But I thank God for each and every one of you. Please, let's not talk about it. Let's be about it. It's coming soon. Anti-gun and crime, focusing on our youth. God bless you. Enjoy the rest of the meeting.
Thank you. Moving on to next items on the agenda, we have introductory readings of ordinances and resolutions. The first is an ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Make a motion, we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've just a quick question. Is this Exhibit A that I'm looking at that you passed out that we're getting ready to? So I'm just curious, in the increased permanent funds, I see that the clerk of council has increased their funds by $5,000. Is that we have a shortfall in the council or in the clerk of council?
For advertising, because we have to advertise in the Cincinnati Enquirer, and the amount that was budgeted for the year was not enough, so we had to request more so that we can continue to, we have to legally advertise
I understand that.
past legislation.
I appreciate that, Mr. President. Thank you for that explanation. That answers my question. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion? Motion on the floor by Mrs. Winterbauer, seconded by Mrs. Hoover, is to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce? I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling.
I move that we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to pass the ordinance. Is there a second? Mr. Gurdon.
I second the motion.
Seconded by Mr. Gurdon. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Mr. Royce? I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to the next item. This is an ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Safety Service to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Ohio Public Works Commission, OPWC, state capital improvement and/or local transportation improvement programs, and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Make a motion, we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance. Mr. Braden.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce? I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Safety Service to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Ohio Public Works Commission, OPWC, state capital improvement and/or local transportation improvement programs, and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Safety Service to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Ohio Public Works Commission, OPWC, state capital improvement and/or local transportation improvement programs, and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Safety Service to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Ohio Public Works Commission, OPWC, state capital improvement and/or local transportation improvement programs, and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll make a motion, we pass the resolution, the ordinance, excuse me.
Motion by Mrs. Hoover to pass the ordinance. Is there a second? Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce? I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Next item on the agenda, ordinance amending the provisions and fee schedules under Chapter 1305.05 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Winterbauer.
I make a motion, we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Girton. I'm just curious if someone could name out loud what provisions are being amended and what fee schedules are being amended, please.
It's in the document.
Are we fees for the building department? Are these fees for the health department, or what types of fees are we looking at here?
Mr. Powers?
These are fees for the building department.
Okay. Okay.
The fees for the building department have not been updated in a number of years. So when our new building department manager came on, I asked him to review the fees, compare them to other communities, then come up with a recommendation that would get us more in line with our peer organizations.
Okay.
And so that's what this would do over a few years. And
I appreciate that.
we would still be below a lot of organizations that are similar to us, but we would be closer.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Powers.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that.
Mr. Garden.
Well, Mr. Powers is up here. My question is about the need for an emergency declaration on this ordinance.
So the reason I'm asking for an emergency declaration, that was my ask on that, not the building department's, was so that we could put this into effect, effective January 1. If council doesn't want to make it an emergency ordinance, that won't be a major deal, but doing 3 readings That would put us into the first meeting in December, and then the 30 days would put us just after the first of the year. So we don't intend to do anything until January 1. So this would give us time to let people know about that and to make it effective right as the year changes over. Just kind of an easier transition time.
I don't have another question right now. For the council, I'm just a little hesitant to push through this. I wish we had more information as to what got moved from what it was to what it is. I do think that updating it with a new building manager is probably a very smart idea, so I'm not against this by any means, but I would like a little more information to know how much was getting changed. So that's my only comment.
Mrs. Hoover?
I believe that it says that it's gonna be a 2% across the board for everything. And then that's gonna be 2%, 2%. Is that correct, Mr. Powers?
It makes some larger adjustments in some of the earlier years, but after that, it does go into a 2% each year, which is what like the city of Cincinnati does and what a lot of organizations do, so that it kind of keeps up with inflation is kind of the goal with that.
Mrs. Hoover?
Thank you. And I'd also like to say, one of the first things that Mrs. Towns said to me when I came on council and was asking her about the building department, she said, "You need to raise the fees." And she's made that very clear every time I see her. So actually, I popped in this morning and said it is on the agenda finally. I can tell you from her perspective, being in the building department, our fees are particularly low. And that it has already been sorry to let people know that the fees will be changing, to give people a little bit of a heads up about it. But the fees have not been updated since, I believe, 2007. And we're not going to be making money off of this. We're not going to be paving our roads with this, but it would alleviate, we wouldn't be losing money with this, is my understanding.
Thank you.
Thank
Mrs.
you.
Bowling?
And the chart is a little bit complex to read, but on page 13 of the packet are the current fees. Page 14 reflects what they would switch to January 1st if this were passed under an emergency, and then it goes over 2026 and the increases on an annual basis after that. So it does show you the current fees and then what they would be changed to if this passed. It goes over each individual one.
Mr. Braden?
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. So I can appreciate the building department employees wanting to increase their fees. I'm just curious if the residents have any input, or if the contractors have any input in this, and our residents. That's the only thing that comes to mind. We've dealt with this a few times, and I guess we could just raise the fees, I guess. A little more discussion, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bonzo?
Yeah, I just wanted to add just a little clarity just from when I was on council. So when I was finance chair, the building, or I guess the safety service director at the time, and/or the building department came to us wanting a 30% increase at the time, and we just basically took no action on it because we didn't really want to mess with a 30% increase. And that was like 6 years ago. So, and it hasn't been changed since then. It didn't change at all since I've been on council, when I was on council. So, I mean, it does make sense. It looks like a 7%, 5%. I think then it goes to 2%. I mean, it's much more moderate compared to what has been proposed in the past. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brady?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. I appreciate that. I remember a committee meeting where we did raise a bunch of fees in the building department. And I remember that happening, and I also remember watching that back, and I didn't really like it much. So all I'm saying is, I think we did that already a few years back. I was on council whenever that came, Mr. Bonzo. I think I was on the finance committee when that happened. And so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, well,
Mr. Bonzo?
yeah, I'll just add, I mean, we talked about it. I mean, we definitely had a committee meeting on it, but we did not pass anything on that. So it actually didn't get passed. And the other thing I'll just say too, they're not asking for 3 readings today. They're just asking you to do one. The emergency clause is just so that when you do pass it at the first meeting in December, that it can go into effect before January 1st. So you do have 2 more meetings if contractors and people want to come and speak
Bless
and
you.
say how effective they can.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Further discussion? Mrs. Bowling?
Yeah, if 2007 is the correct date for these fees, it seems absurd to me that the rates haven't changed since, I can't think of a single other thing that cost the same that it did in 2007. That'd be nice. I wish gas was the same as it was in 2007. But it does seem like there is maybe some interest in having more conversation about this and inviting some residents. Who made our original motion?
So Mrs. Winterbauer, and then seconded by Mrs. Hoover.
Would you be open to amending to a first reading but keeping the emergency clause?
Mrs. Winterbauer.
I'd like to amend my motion to suspend the rules and only have the first reading.
No need to suspend the rules with just one reading.
So we'll have to do, sorry, so then the
Just
next
have the
time.
first reading.
But then the next reading.
If we're having one reading per meeting, there's no need to suspend the rules. Suspending the rules is when there's more than one reading at a meeting. And the emergency clause is already declared in the ordinance.
Okay.
So you're amending the motion to have the first reading of the ordinance?
Yes, sir.
Mrs. Hoover, you will amend your second?
Yes, please, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any further discussion? So the amended motion on the floor is to hear the first reading of the ordinance. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce? I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have the first reading of the ordinance.
Ordinance amending the provisions and fee schedules under Chapter 1305.05 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Moving on to the next item, it is a resolution celebrating the month of November 2024 as National Native American Heritage Month in the city of Norwood, Ohio. Mrs. Hoover.
Make a resolution, or excuse me, make a motion that we, wow, it's been a long day. Suspend the rules and have all three readings. Thank you, sir.
Motion by Mrs. Hoover is to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the resolution. Mrs. Bowling.
I will second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Mrs. Hoover.
I just want to share that Norwood is home to the Norwood Mound. A lot of folks know, a lot of folks don't know. It's a very, very special place up in Tower Park. I encourage folks to check it out. It is a prehistoric indigenous mound, and I've been very excited to have been working with the Norwood Historical Society as well as some city folks on making sure that the mound is properly recognized, and we've been able to connect with some folks from the Ohio Historic Preservation. And so just in this month, in all months, but I would encourage folks to take a moment and drive up there and enjoy that very special place that we have here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Motion on the floor by Mrs. Hoover, seconded by Mrs. Bowling, is to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the resolution. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce? I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the resolution.
A resolution celebrating the month of November 2024 as National Native American Heritage Month in the city of Norwood, Ohio. A resolution celebrating the month of November 2024 as National Native American Heritage Month in the city of Norwood, Ohio. A resolution celebrating the month of November 2024 as National Native American Heritage Month in the city of Norwood, Ohio.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling.
I move that we pass the ordinance, resolution.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to pass the resolution. Is there, Mrs. Hoover?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce? I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to the next item, Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate you letting me break into the meeting here. I would like to make I'd like to make a motion, if I may, given to what we've heard tonight, about the preemptive thoughts that we may have towards this. We haven't passed anything yet on this, so I'd like to make a motion that maybe we shelf this until we pass until we pass something on this, because just given the words that were said tonight about transparency and, you know, us having preconceived notions, I think maybe that we should shelf this until we pass something in that and then create some sort of, it just seems like that we're putting the cart before the horse if we create something and we haven't passed it yet. Am I wrong? I'd like to have some input on that. Thank you. So my motion would be to shelf this until we pass something, and then we could create a entity to spend the money if so we pass that.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Mr. President. To the point of us having the ordinance here, or the resolution, on the same night that we had the public hearing, that's the way we've always done it, for everything. For every zoning thing, if there's a public hearing, we have the ordinance prepared so that council can pass something if they want to that night. Because the nightmare is, oh, we have a public hearing, everybody thinks it's the most wonderful thing in the world, we want to change the zoning, we want to change this, we want to add this. Hey, can the law department draft something? Yeah, we can have that in a couple weeks for you, and then everybody's got to wait around. So of course the ordinance or the resolution is here for council's consideration. If the thing that council will pass, council, if this is going to happen, there's one thing council passes, and it's this resolution. This resolution creates the district and appoints the majority of the members of the board of the district, of the area. It's an area, right? The new community. It's the dumbest name. I can't believe they didn't come up with something better. But this is the thing that makes it happen. It's this resolution. There is nothing else. The thing before was, oh, by the way, they've submitted a valid application, and we're going to set a public hearing. So we set a public hearing. That was tonight, to hear from the public, to hear if the public has any comments about it. PLK has been here to talk about it, right? They came to a committee meeting. Am I imagining that, or was it a council meeting?
I believe you're right.
So they were here, and they kind of went through lots of questions and answers about it, what it was. Tonight was the public hearing, and then now the resolution is in front of council. And council can pass it or not pass it, or have a reading or two readings and think about it, or I know PLK is in a hurry to get it done, but those are the options council has. So this is the resolution that creates it and appoints 4 of the 7 members of the board. And council gets to decide 4 of the 7. 1 is a city official, and the other 3 are just people, so. And we have people that actually understand how this all works that are here tonight, one representing us and one representing a developer. So if there are more specific questions, Mr. Woodside is the one to ask. But the process question is, this is the thing that council has to consider.
Okay, I'll respond.
Mr. Brady?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Moore, for that explanation. What I read is this is us approving a board, but we don't have to approve the actual tax. This is just saying, yeah, we approve that we're going to tax them, and we're going to make a board to spend it. That's what?
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Mr. President. So the city does not impose the tax or the fee or whatever the terminology. The city does not impose that. The board imposes that.
Okay.
And so this would create a board for this community area that would then be authorized to impose up to a 2% sales tax in the restaurants and the retail, and then I think 1% hotel tax if and when a hotel is built and guests start staying there. So it's the board that does that. It's the board that decides how to spend the money. Now, the city's kind of, stake in this is the city appoints the majority of those board members. But you can't appoint board members if there isn't a board, and this would create the board. And in order to make things move as quickly as possible, it has spaces for council to fill in the names of the people they want to be on the board. But the city technically doesn't impose it, but the city creates a body that then has the authority to impose that. So if you don't want it, if it's like, we don't want to tax, we don't want to get a sales tax, something there to help fund any part of the development or the things that go on there, then don't create a board.
That
So that would be
explains
the
it.
thing.
Thank you. I appreciate you clarifying that for me. You see a light bulb going off above my head here? Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So next item on the agenda is a resolution organizing the Factory 52 Community Authority, establishing the boundaries of the authority, appointing members of the Board of Trustees of the authority, establishing the method for selecting the Board of Trustees of the authority, establishing the method of dissolution of the authority, and fixing the surety bond amount for the members of the Board of Trustees. What is your pleasure? Mrs. Hoover.
I'd like to make a motion that we have the first reading.
Motion by Mrs. Hoover to have the first reading of the resolution. Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion?
I would like to invite Mr. Woodside up. He has a face, he doesn't like my motion.
No, I just want to clarify some things, Mr. President, Council. So Keith, I think sent an email around, and one of the authorizations in here, or one of the actions in here is to appoint the board, 4 members out of a 7-member board. And I just want to point out that if we're going to approve this resolution, that those members would be appointed. I know an email went out letting everybody know that was part of this, and as Keith pointed out, that within 10 days of the formation of this, those board appointments need to be made by this council. So if you don't do it at the same time as approving this, you're going to have a special meeting. It's under the rules. I don't know what necessarily would happen if you didn't do it within 10 days, but 10 days from now is going to pass us by before the next meeting. So if you would like to appoint that board right now, I'd recommend that you have a nomination of those 4 and then approval of those, or you can get ready for that at the next meeting, whatever you want to do. I just want to make sure procedurally that we understand what the requirements are. So that was a lot right there, but
For
Yes.
clarification purposes, though.
Yes.
The motion on the floor was to have the first reading only.
Oh,
So
okay.
they technically would not pass tonight.
okay,
with
so
that
and as
motion.
long as the law director is okay with adding those names between now and the second or third final approval, then that sounds like a great action to me.
Mr.
Mr.
President?
Moore.
Actually, the technical way to do that is to amend the resolution to add those names and then vote. Then you get started over voting from the beginning, because we don't have names. Council has to pick the names, has to come up with 4 names. And so you can talk about it now in the discussion. Maybe you've had people who have reached out. Maybe I have people that I would want to appoint, but, I'm not sure if they'd want to serve, but I definitely have people that I would be, I think would be fun to put in, but I don't know. I haven't talked to any of them, because I don't get a vote, so.
Mrs. Bowling.
Could that process look like tonight we have a first reading, next council we have a second reading, meeting after that we amend to include the Board of Trustees members
Which
and
would
have
then require all 3
readings?
readings.
Yes.
Okay, so this still could be a 3-meeting process.
Correct,
We
but
would not have
understand
to.
with that, you would need 6 of the 7 members to vote to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings.
Yes.
And we'd also need to have quorum. Or not, we'd need to have 5 people.
You need 6 people, period, to pass it.
Okay,
To suspend the rules, let me clarify.
okay.
Mr. Braden.
I got one more thing to say, I guess. I'm okay with having a reading. Seems a little rushed, in my opinion. Seems like we're really rushing this for some reason, but I'm okay with the reading. That's my comment, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Royce.
We did have to vote to have the public hearing, pretty quickly. We had this in our hands for, I think, 5 hours before we had to vote on the public hearing, but that was 3 weeks ago. So I understand it, I guess I would just push back on it feeling rushed, or that I feel like there was an implication something nefarious was happening maybe in the public comments, but, I just want to say, I didn't speak to anyone from PLK. We all got this around the same time, and then we had to set a public hearing, and now we're voting on the first reading. So and that'll be another 2 weeks before, I would just like to point out, it's not that fast, in my opinion. That's what I'm gonna get at.
Mrs. Bowling.
Yeah, just a comment, and then I do have a few questions. We did have an opportunity to speak with you previously, where we asked quite a few questions and got a lot of clarity on this community authority and kind of the ins and outs and how it works. So I do just want to clarify that this has not been a rushed process on our end. We've had ample opportunity to ask questions, to get feedback, to delve into this resolution. This is not the first time we're seeing it when we sat down here today. So I agree, there was it did feel that there was an implication that there was some sort of speeding it along in order to brush things under the rug. And we have had many weeks to review this at this point. I do have a few questions. Some of them I have asked you before, but for the greater good, I would like to ask again, just to clarify some points. Is that okay, Mr. President? Thank you. It was mentioned that this was a hidden fee. Is there a separate line item on receipts that this fee is clearly stated to guests when they check out?
Yeah, that is part of the process to put it on there. It has to be included on that. I believe that's how it works at the banks, right? Not at Liberty. I mean,
It shows up either as a sales tax, so it does show up as a separate charge. I can't recall if it's a sales tax or if it's a separate line item. I think it depends on where you're at. I think the banks does have it as a separate line.
Yeah, I believe they have a separate line item.
In my
on here.
experience at the banks, it
Yeah,
shows
it
up as
says-
an amenity fee as a separate line item on the receipt.
Yeah, I don't know if it specifically says new community authority fee, but it is broken out where you see why you're paying your extra couple pennies or whatever,
Okay.
or more.
And what
More
have the business owners' feedbacks been? Their interest level, are they responding positively, the business owners at Factory 52?
State my name, are we good?
Yes, please.
All right, Nick Lingenfelter with PLK Communities. The majority of our tenants some don't always understand it, so it takes a little bit of time to walk through what we're doing, but all of our food hall tenants seem open to it. They know either they're going to have to put this in place or we're going to have to charge them an additional marketing fee or something else to continue the activity. So to them, it's like, if people are coming from all over the city, why shouldn't they be helping pay that burden? It's also from a hotel standpoint, because we're hoping to announce our hotel operator soon, something that they're looking forward to. So they want to know that there are events and other things that their future guests can have an opportunity to see. And they also understand, their guests are going to help support the events that happen at the site. So we look at, a lot of them look at it really as a use tax, and it's people that are actually using the amenities or helping contribute to keep it up. So when we do those events, it's a lot of damage on the turf. It takes its toll. So we have to have the ability to keep it up in kind of the best shape possible. So.
Beautiful. I have a couple more. I'm sorry, this is lengthy. I have a bullet list.
Okay.
And are there limits to what this fee funds could be used on?
Yes, there are. So there's a list in the front. I don't know if I'm going to cover those.
I was going to say, currently though, it is relatively broad. I will say, the intent is that it be used for activation. There are some statutory rules about it being used for, I think it's called community facilities or community services that are limited to this area, but currently under the actual document you would approve, it is pretty broad. I don't think it specifically says, these 3 events a year, 4 events a year, so there's not a lot of limitation around that right now. Now, the board is going to have more of an influence, the board of the new community authority is going to have more of an influence over that than this council would. But in part, this council can influence that by having their appointments to that board, one of which is a representative of the local government. Oftentimes that's somebody in the administration of somebody who works at the city of Norwood. You there, but as an example, so kill me. But for example, Noah, to put on the board as someone who is involved as your representative on that board to keep you informed of those things and also to dictate some of the policy of that board. But like I said, I just want to make sure it's clear that right now that is pretty broad.
And could that include things like payroll, or is it limited to, what kind of limitations are there in the wording?
It basically can be used for, again, it's like community services. So imagine the activations that you talk about, cleaning, new facilities, the community facilities that are sort of part of that, I guess, open area that's there, but it's not going to pay the salaries of the private employees of PLK or anything, but it may pay, I don't know, I think they'd be probably better off, I think they have more of a plan for that, but again, it's pretty broad, so I don't want to.
Sure. So to Pat's point, the plan is, of course, that the way that this would work is once the NCA is created, the board ultimately has control over how the size of the levy up to the maximums put in the petition and then what the money is spent on. The petition itself has a pretty broad range. It can be pretty much spent on anything that the Chapter 349 of the revised code allows it for. The initial intent and what will happen as part of the board meeting, which will be set for a future time, would be that the board would vote on a services agreement. And the services agreement we would expect and we would propose basically would retain a PLK entity to act as the manager of the site. They would basically do this without, as a nonprofit basis, to essentially just act as the conduit to take care of contracting with third parties to put on primarily events at the site. So the primary spend of this, and just to go back a little bit, this actually dates back to the 2021 development agreement where this originally came up and was discussed. It's basically the same idea. It's mainly for activation of the site. Sub-use would be for like snow plowing of the public streets because they're not dedicated to the city. And so the management does not fall in the city, but they are publicly used, so they have to be maintained. And this would be one of the eligible uses. But initially, the first budget that the board would see, probably 90% going toward things like, you know, the community Easter egg hunts, things like that, that would be available for members of the public to attend.
I just have one last question. I asked this at the last meeting, but it feels important for folks to hear. Currently, what is the out-of-pocket spend that PLK has spent on public events at Factory 52?
I will let Nick correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the current spend for these public events is about $400,000 per annum.
Thank you.
Mrs. Hoover?
I wanted to also respond to a question Mrs. Bowling had. I talked to a couple of the restaurants at Factory 52. One, I don't want to say any names, I love them all. One wasn't aware of it and didn't quite understand it, and the others were like, oh, okay, and were very, very neutral about it. So I just wanted to give you that feedback that I have actually reached out to some folks. A question that I have, and I'm not sure who this would be for, was a question one of the residents asked about changing the board, the status of the board, and
Yeah, and I'll go back and look at that. I was a little unsure of exactly what that language was, but the way the statute works is that it has a process for the initial appointment of the board members. So what you'd be doing here, appointing your 4 board members, and then the developer, owner of all the property, appointing the other 3 board members. And in the statute, there's a somewhat lengthy discussion or description of election process once those board members' terms expired. But the statute also says, or you can basically have your own determination of how you want successor boards to be appointed. And so what we've said is that successor board, or as each board member's term expires, that board member who is rolling off will be replaced in the same manner that was originally appointed. So at least in the resolution, we have that it shall be, those appointments shall be done in the way they're originally done, meaning that the appointments that this council makes will also be the same way that the replacement board members are appointed. Meaning that of the 4 that are being appointed by this council, when their terms expire, they will be replaced by appointments made again by this council. So, and that I think is pretty clear. But again, if anybody does have questions about the language in any of this, feel free. I know I always say that, but if you receive questions from the public or have your own, please send them to me and we'll go through the document. But again, I looked at that in here myself when I heard that, and at least in this resolution, which is what would dictate it, you can see in section, let's see, it'd be section 4, where it says that the council adopts an alternative form of selecting successor members pursuant to chapter 349, and declares that replacement trustees shall be appointed from time to time by the council in the developer in the same manner as the initial appointment. So point there is that you're not going to lose control in that you would somehow lose that power to make those appointments, which is, again, your way of having representation on that board.
And then final question, and I asked this before and you were, actually maybe it was Nick answered. Can the money be used for private events? Like a ticketed event or something where a resident can't walk down the street and join?
I don't think there's anything that strictly prohibits that. I don't know if that's really the goal, but again, I think that is something that would fall under the board, the NCA board's determination of whether to pay or to use the funds to pay for events that are then going to be generating money. And I would think if they were going to do that, that the NCA would want that money to come back to them to be used for similar purposes. And I'm just honestly not even thinking from a legal perspective. I'm just trying to think of other events where I've seen that, and generally they don't want to do that because the point is to bring people down there to go spend money, at the establishments there. And part of the reason for having the new community authority is so that you don't have to ticket them, so that people will go down there and then they buy food and sort of, But I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I certainly think that's the intent.
Yes, so Andrew Spoor again, Developer Council. The plan would ultimately be that generally there would not be ticketed events. An NCA can put on ticketed events. The revenues would have to go to the new community authority as part of its revenue stream. And the board would have some control over that. And so the board could say, no, we don't want to have an event that is ticketed. The developer could theoretically put that on privately themselves and pay for it themselves. The only time I believe, and Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's been ticketing so far is sometimes parts of events will require ticketing for legal reasons. Like if you have a community barbecue and you have a bourbon tasting component of it, the bourbon tasting component has to be actually corded off and you have to pay to get a ticket. But that money would be something that the operator of that component of the event would just keep, and it wouldn't inure to the benefit of the developer or really the NCA. It would just be the developer, they come in and say, we want to do a bourbon tasting, you have to have some kind of nominal fee to get there. That, to my knowledge, is the sort of ticketing that's taken place to date. But yes, you could have it. It would just be, the revenue would go to the new community authority if it's pay a ticket to get into the event.
Thank you.
Mr. Braden.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I first of all want to give PLK their props. They've been a model, as far as I know, they've been a model developer here in Norwood, and I appreciate them for that, and I support them in their endeavors, and probably will in the future. Before the meeting, I just want to explain, I had a resident come up to me and say, I'm just concerned. This was pushed through at a little, at the final hour at our last meeting, and I explained to them that, they followed the rules. They asked for a public hearing. We have one tonight. I'm okay with feeling like it's a little rushed. I'm okay with being the one that feels like this is a little rushed. I don't think we should, sounds like we're gonna have one reading, which is okay. I'm okay with that. But, as far as showing up and passing this and putting our friends on a board, I'm a little uncomfortable with that. And I'm okay being the one uncomfortable with that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Mr. Gurdon.
I think my biggest concern about this, and I made my opinions clear in our previous meeting, but my biggest concern about this is I don't know that this is in the best interest of Norwood residents. And we are giving the blessing of the city over to add this tax. And I don't know that I want the city associated with this tax, even though I know that it's not, and it's going to go to this new authority. But I'm very hesitant to raise taxes, and I don't see this being in the best interest of Norwood citizens to raise taxes, even if it's only in a select geographic area. Until otherwise, I don't see myself supporting this resolution.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowman.
I just want to clarify because I think language is important. This is not a tax, this is a fee. And it is not this is not an income tax, this is not, this is a fee that is just happening in this footprint. We would not be raising taxes for residents of Norwood. It would just be a fee for folks who wanted to spend money at Factory 52.
I guess you learned that, didn't you?
Any further discussion? Motion on the floor by Mrs. Hoover, seconded by Mrs. Bowling, is to have the first reading of the resolution. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce? I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterpower?
Yes.
Mr. Gurdon?
No.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
By a vote of 5-1, the motion carries. please have the first reading of the resolution?
A resolution organizing the Factory 52 Community Authority, establishing the boundaries of the authority, appointing members of the Board of Trustees of the authority, establishing the method for selecting the Board of Trustees of the authority, establishing the method for dissolution of the authority, and fixing the surety bond amount for the members of the Board of Trustees.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is administration reports. Mayor Snyder.
Thank you.
Button.
First of all, I'd say, big picture. Somewhere along the line, not only council, but the residents of Norwood have to look at the big picture. And a lot of events that I go to are in community spaces, much like we're talking about here. And those events are put on by these same type of tools, these same methods. And as you go into these areas in Cincinnati and Blue Ash and other communities, they're able to do this because of these amenity fees. And as I go there, I pay for them. One of the areas I hate paying for is like the Cincinnati Zoo. Because as a Hamilton County resident, I'm taxed for the Cincinnati Zoo. I pay for the Cincinnati Zoo to be there. Recently, I've heard that the Cincinnati Zoo is going to discount ticket prices to people from Campbell County or Boone County or Kenton County or right over here in Butler County and Warren County. Let's discount it for them and make it cheaper so they can come to the Hamilton County Zoo. But I'm the taxpayer in Hamilton County paying for the zoo, but I got to pay full price. That seems sort of ass backwards. So we need to start thinking about this for what it really is. For 20 years, my mom's sitting out for 20 years, she's been a member of the Norwood Fireworks Committee. We've scraped money together. For a huge community event, we've scraped money together. We had to do fundraising. We go out to everybody and say, give us $20, give us just a little bit of money. We will celebrate our Independence Day in Norwood with the Fireworks Committee. The city doesn't have any money. We've got to find a way to have this event. It's a community event. There's so much spirit, so much patriotism. But it's not taxpayer money. It's volunteer. It's money we got to go out and beg people for. The city, all of us in the city of Norwood, I keep on saying the city, and I forget that people always think the city is Cincinnati. Even when the engineers are talking, they'll say the city. We're Norwood. We're 3 square miles. We're the city. We don't have a ton of money to put on events. PLK has spent $400,000 the last few years putting on events that all of us in our community can walk to these events. And now we're saying that the other people who drive to PLK that come from outside of our city, Little Norwood, that come there to enjoy it, oh no, we don't want to charge them an amenity fee. We'll have to pay it too, you're right. If we go there, we'll have to pay it also. But regionally, anybody in Hamilton County, anybody from across the river that comes to PLK because there's such a draw, such an appeal there, anybody from the hotel that comes down and enjoys that concert and drinks a beer, they're paying a little bit for that amenity. What is wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. There's everything right about that. When you talk about the zoo and other stuff that we're being taxed on, that's wrong. Hamilton County should be getting the discount. We should be getting the discount for our residents in Hamilton County, not giving it out to everybody else. How does that work? So and I look at this and I say, we got to look at big picture here. What are we doing in the city of Norwood? We want this development. We've said all along, we need development. We need more earnings tax. We need more coming in. Even when you guys question the fees for the building department that defray the cost of the city's operation of a building department that protects our property values, we're saying, no, we're not going to raise those. We can't do that. Let's just use more tax money and pay for that so the developer doesn't have to pay, or the small businessman or the homeowner doesn't have. Somewhere along the line, we're off the rails here. We should be looking at how much the fees are for our building department, and we should be raising them on a regular basis and saying, this is to defray the cost of our guys that are protecting our property values. But we're questioning like, I don't know. I don't think our citizens, and I sure don't think the contractors are going to want to pay any more money on that, or developers. Let's keep it really low. Well, less streets we're going to pave, less fire trucks we're going to have. If we look at it that way, if we look at it very small-minded, we have to look at the big picture. We have to look at what this community is providing for the residents And that's something I look like we're a little off track here, somewhere along the line. Our Elm Avenue flood project, we just had a meeting. Noah, the safety service director, and I just had a meeting. We're $1 million off. With all the work we've done, with the money that we've gotten committed from Hamilton County, with the money that the city has set aside, we're still $1 million away from getting that project done. We're not going to be able to get that project done. It's really disheartening. It's disheartening to me because we put so much, my staff has put so much time and effort into this. Council members, Chris Kelch put so much time and effort into this. We went to the county, we begged, we got what we thought we could get from them. We thought we could move forward with that. We're $1 million off. And the cost is not going to get cheaper. It's going to get more expensive. And 20 years ago when we were trying to do this, we didn't have the money to do it. But don't raise any of those fees. You know, let's keep spending the city's money, you know, sort of pound wise, penny foolish. What is it, penny foolish, pound wise? I mean, somewhere along the line, we're off track when we look at this stuff. So those are things I caution as we move forward, and our community members need to think about these things. Big picture. What really are we trying to accomplish here? We want a beautiful city. We want our property values to be up. We want safe. We want security. We want beautiful new developments. We want the entertainment that keeps us here. We don't have to drive a car to go and sit with our friends at a first-class place like the Gatherall. We can walk there and walk back. Isn't that what we're trying to achieve here? And we're sort of going down the wrong direction in a couple of these areas. So, you know, please keep in mind what we're trying to achieve, what the long goal is. We've got to play a long game. I want all the streets repaved. We're going to do Montgomery Road from Court Plain to Court Plain. We just did 561. We've got the lateral looking pretty good right now. We got to get residential streets. We got so many reasons to keep moving in the right direction, but we're sort of getting off track here. So I'll get off my soapbox. I'll take it down a notch. A couple of different things. We had the Veterans Day tree planting. I don't know if any of you saw that. We have Donna Lake put that together in the tree board, and they do such a great job bringing those things together, and it's really appreciated. We also, let's see, there's tonight, I guess that's two more things. One is tonight, there's a main water line connection being completed on Montgomery Road at the UDF expansion that they're doing there. So tomorrow morning when you wake up, you might have some air bubbles in your water. Let it run a little bit, but that should be. I've been assured it'll be completed before 8 o'clock in the morning, so it won't bother anybody's showers. Right, Noah? Noah's saying I didn't say that, but we think that won't be a problem. That's a good part. And then, last but not least, most importantly, well, maybe not most importantly, is this weekend on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we have the high school play is going on. It's called Emma, and if you want to go to it, it's held at our middle school auditorium. Everybody's been there. It's a beautiful auditorium. If you haven't been there, go to it. The show on Friday starts at 7, Saturday at 7, and Sunday it's a matinee at 2 o'clock. I hear it's based on a Jane Austen novel. I hear it's a lot of fun, and you'll have a great time at it. So if you get a chance, please go out and really help our Norwood High School theater program. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mayor Schneider? All right, Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. So earnings taxes continue to, be strong this year. We're up 7% for the year compared to where we were last year, and it's even higher compared to what the plan has. So that's really great news. The staff that are in there are working really hard. We're almost done. We're pretty much we're caught up with all individual returns. Basically, as they come in, because we had a bunch come in for the October tax extension, but those are all done. So we're excited that we're actually starting some stuff now because we're relatively fully staffed, although we could use one more. We sent that over to you, Mr. Mayor. But we are starting stuff that hasn't been done in 10 years, like some different business withholding reconciliations and other items that need to get done, but we've just been in catch-up mode the last few years just from catching up from previous years. So we're really excited about that. The numbers kind of reflect that. They work really hard in the city to kind of maximize the amount of revenue that we have come in. One thing to note is just that our refunds this year have been higher than average. So just refunds are just when there's various reasons why, but some reasons are when businesses go through and audit some of the stuff that they've submitted in the past. Sometimes they find mistakes that have to get refunded. And, we always push back hard. Like, one of them recently was like, we want interest on this refund. No, you're not getting interest because it was your mistake. Like, you're going to get, but you will get what you're rightfully owed once they show us that they refiled their federal returns. So there's, long story short is that we're going to be running a little bit low on that refund. So we probably will be good enough this year. We're just going to carry over some of our requests to like first thing next year when we get the appropriations, but just wanted to keep you all abreast of that. But other than that, things are going great, and we're, like I said, happy to positively contribute to the city.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Bonzo? All right, Mr. Miracle.
Thank you, Mr. President. As we've talked about in the last couple of Finance Committee meetings, if everyone has a chance to view the auditor's website, we have added the Ohio checkbook for the last 3 years, 22, 23, and 24. And we will add years 19, 20, and 21, hopefully by the end of the week. That's as far back as they go to 2019. Also, we're working on our records retention in the auditor's office and working with the Records Commission, and also our star rating system. It's a monitoring transparency and government with the Ohio Auditors website. And then also we are continuing working diligently on the report on accounting methods. That's all I have this evening.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Miracle? All right, Mr. Moore? Any questions for Mr. Moore? All right. Moving on to unfinished business. Any unfinished business? Mrs. Hoover?
I've got a couple, surprise. First, I want to just acknowledge we had, Norwood is now home to the Board of Elections, and they did such an amazing job with early voting. Alex Linzer, who's the deputy director, just did such a phenomenal job. I was there. I tried to get there almost every day. We had both our Norwood police officers, we had Xavier Police, we had Hamilton County Sheriff's Office. It was overall so lovely, so respectful, so community, and they had record turnouts. There's been a lot of talk about the election, and I feel like I just want to say this one thing. One of my favorite moments from Election Day was actually outside of my polling location, and the mayor was there. And it was just so lovely to be in my neighborhood, and I'm with my colored sample ballots, and he's with his colored sample ballot, and we're neighbors, and we probably voted differently, but we both feel very committed to this community. And I think, and I know I've said this before, and I'll be a broken record, there's so much more that connects us than separates us, and I'm excited to continue to work forward in Norwood. I would be remiss in saying I am disappointed about Sherrod Brown's election. He did give $1.5 million to the city for our parks. I hope that his replacement is as connected to Norwood and takes care of us. Maybe this is a question, if I can do that in this, but I did watch the infrastructure meeting, and so I was aware of Elm Street, which of course is devastating news. But I'm wondering if we could maybe donate or earmark some dollars for, say, swamp oaks along that area, just for some mediation in the meantime. And I don't know who I would ask that to. I'm all about trees, as Candace and I are. We're going to re-tree all of Norwood. So I don't know who I should put that question to.
I will pose that to anyone who would like to answer.
Anyone.
I think the Safety Service Director and I have already talked about, maybe potentially some signage, some different things there to help people understand that flooding that is going to continue. We have not talked about, you're talking about trees?
Mm-hmm. Swamp oaks specifically that are, that's not going to fix the problem, let's be clear, but it might be a way to help mediate a little bit in some of those backyards. That was just an idea that I had.
That would maybe be a discussion with the tree board.
Okay.
That could potentially
I will put
look
that
at
on to them.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I had another, and
Mrs.
this also
Stewart.
might be a question, for the Montgomery Road plan. I was curious if, I know that we're not doing a bike lane down the main business section. I'm wondering if we are folding into the plan some signage for wayfinding for folks to get to Floral. My understanding was that's what we were going to be doing, was encouraging people to use Floral, but is
Mr.
any
Powers?
waymaking going to happen?
That area will be striped as a sharrow, so it will indicate on the pavement that you can bike on that area.
On Montgomery Road?
Yeah, that's right.
So we're going to have, I'm sorry, can you just say that again, on Long Montgomery Road?
It would be marked as a sharrow. So it's basically just marked so that it's indicating that cars and bicycles can use it.
Okay, so
So
not
there's-
specifically a bike lane, but sort of indicates that bikes,
Basically, it's letting motorists know to watch out for cyclists.
okay.
But there's not any plan included to direct bicycle traffic to different areas.
Okay. And I know way back when there was, sorry, Mr. Powers, this is probably a question for you again. There was a conversation about crosswalks possibly being a different material. Is that, or having like the thermal paint?
So, yeah, these would be marked with high-vis thermal paint. It's like a thermoplastic, basically the same material that we've used on 561.
Okay. All right, thank you. Those were,
All right. Any other unfinished business? Moving on to new business. Any new business? Mrs. Winterbauer.
This is my reminder to remind you to maybe reschedule our second meeting.
I wrote it.
Okay.
Yes.
In December, because that
Correct.
second Tuesday is
Christmas
the
Eve.
24th, Christmas Eve.
So I'm not sure if, I was just looking one day ahead, Monday, December the 23rd, instead of Tuesday, December the 24th. I don't know that, I don't know how many people are interested in meeting the evening of Christmas Eve, but
But we will need the meeting for budget stuff.
correct. And it is possible we may need another meeting prior to the end of the year for final appropriations. But looking at moving the meeting now, do we want to move it to the 23rd? Or is there an interest to move it to the 30th instead to see if there is anything?
We need to have enough time to get the budget stuff done.
Right.
I mean, to do it the 30th, that's going to make it
Right.
a challenge.
So 23rd at 7:30?
I vote 23rd.
That works? All right, and I will make sure that Angela is made aware as well, so that that can be updated on the calendar. Any other new business? Mrs. Hoover?
I need to schedule a housing committee meeting. And this is for, Ms. Myers had to leave, but she wants to come to the committee to discuss the warming center. We've met with Kevin Finn, the strategies to prevent homelessness, as well as our building manager about processes. So she wants to give a presentation about that. What does your schedule look like? Housing.
What week are you?
Well, could anyone do it next week? Say, I can't do Tuesday, I've got dance class. Could anyone do Wednesday at 7?
I can do Wednesday.
Sorry, who else is on? You're not on.
I'm okay with Wednesday.
Wednesday, the 20th at 7? Wonderful.
And you can send all the items, agenda items to Angela so
Angela,
that she can.
tonight. We will do that this evening.
Mrs. Hoover?
You've missed me, I know. A couple other items. Just when I was driving here tonight, it is dark out, really early. Please pay attention for pedestrians. The whole Queen City Running Club was out, and I really appreciated they had their bright flashings on. But at this time of the year, there's a lot of folks still out walking around, so be extra careful of them. I wanted to share, I wasn't able to go to the meeting for the development that is under discussion along Wasson Way. But Town Properties is looking at purchasing that piece of land, and they are starting to do some community engagement. So they had their first meeting last week. For folks that recall, this is what the Joseph BW owns, and they are looking at Town Properties building 2 units on 2/3 of that land. So 1/3, the 1/3 that's closest to School Outfitters would remain a dead parking lot space. But for the rest of it would be 2 buildings housing about 205 apartments, 1 and 2 bedroom, market rate. And they, I know the first thing I said was, what about retail? And they said, Mr. Mayor said he needed retail. And I'm like, yeah, whatever he said, we want more. So they're very actively interested in our feedback. So they'll be having another engagement in January. So I encourage folks to go to that. Also just wanted to share that the Norwood Chamber of Commerce Happy Hours, December the 9th from 4 to 7. I went last year and it was a lot of fun, and I even won a little thing. So I encourage businesses to go check that out. And then the last thing I have is we have scheduled the blood drive for this year. It will be January the 11th. And just keep that in mind, that I'm going to come ask you for blood later. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling.
2 things. One, I apologize for being on my phone. I try to stay off it during meetings, but my sister is in labor, so I've been checking on her. She's doing great. There is no baby yet. The other thing is I'm hosting an event November 24th at the main library in downtown Cincinnati from 1:30 to 3:30, and it is an LGBTQ marriage protection info session. If folks are interested in coming to establish power of attorney, medical proxy, a living will, we will have lawyers and notaries on site to do all of that for you for free.
Thank you. Thanks. Any other new business? All right. Moving on to communications. Ms. Royce.
I motion that we receive and file communications 1 through 3 as of read.
All right. Motion by Ms. Royce to receive and file communications number 1, 2, and 3 as if read. Mr. Braden.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce, I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to communication number 4. This is a letter from the Safety Service Director regarding increase in water rates.
Mr. Joseph Gears, President and members of Norwood City Council, regarding water rates, an increase of 5.55%. Dear President and members of Norwood City Council, I have enclosed a copy of the ordinance from the City of Cincinnati raising water rates to the City of Norwood by 5.55%. Norwood Ordinance 20-1992 states the Director of Public Services shall levy and assess charges in a sufficient amount to pay the current operating expenses and cost of permanent improvements to the city waterworks or water system on an annual basis. The Director of Public Service shall notify council in written form of every increase in water charges or assessments at least 30 days prior to the implementation of the same. With regard to the above, the City of Norwood water rates will increase by 5.55% beginning on January 1st, 2025. We are working diligently to continue improving our water service throughout the city and keeping customer rates in line with purchasing rates. It is of the utmost importance. I have also attached information regarding the CAP program for low-income seniors to assist with this rate increase. Sincerely, Noah Powers, Safety Service Director.
Thank you. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Okay, make a motion to receive and file the letter.
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to receive and file the communication. Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Mrs. Hoover.
I was just wanting to ask if Mr. Powers could put the MSD CAP program on our social media for folks. That's the one that has income support for low-income support.
Yeah, we've placed that on the city's Facebook previously in the past. We can do that again. It's also on the city's website year-round.
Wonderful, thank you.
So that's always available, and it has also been posted on our bulletin board in the hallway. So
Awesome. thank
lots of
you.
places, because that is an important one that folks can get some assistance on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, motion on the floor by Mrs. Winterbauer, seconded by Mrs. Bowling, is to receive and file the communication. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce? I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Next item is a letter from Mayor Schneider regarding Mayor's Court's fines for October 2024.
Mr. Joseph S. Gears, President, members of Norwood City Council, regarding Mayor's Court fines. Dear Mr. President and council members, enclosed, please find the report for Norwood Mayor's Court for the month of October 2024. Should you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, Victor Schneider.
Mrs. Bowling.
I move that we receive and file.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to receive and file. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce? I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to next letter is a letter from the Norwood Planning Commission regarding placing a PUD north of Robertson.
To the President of Council, Joseph S. Gears, and members of Norwood City Council from the Norwood Planning Commission regarding Planning Commission's recommendation to Council to place a planned unit development overlay for the property north of Robertson Avenue, known as 4500 Beach Street. On November 6, 2024, the Norwood Planning Commission held a public hearing regarding the placement of a planned unit development overlay zoning district over the property north of Robertson Avenue, known as 4500 Beach Street, Norwood, Ohio, 45212, 6.480 acreage, Hamilton County Auditor's Book 651, page 0019, parcel 0127, located within M2 Heavy Manufacturing Zoning District. After listening to testimony, the Norwood Planning Commission voted unanimously to endorse and forward the above-mentioned PUD overlay to Norwood City Council for a public hearing and further consideration. Planning Commission would further ask this memo be placed on the November 12, 2024 meeting of Norwood City Council in order for council to set a public hearing no earlier than December 10th, 2024, based on sections 1117.10 and 1117.11 of the Norwood Codified Ordinance. Upon receipt of the recommendations of the Planning Commission, the Norwood City Council shall schedule a public hearing no earlier than 30 days from the receipt of this memorandum.
Thank you. Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Motion to receive and file the letter and schedule a public hearing for December the 10th, please.
23rd, December 23rd.
I believe it said December 10th.
No.
No?
No earlier than, but for the purposes of advertising.
Oh, okay, December 23rd. Thank you very much, Mr. President. 20,
We should now.
It's not a funny joke.
23rd.
Yes,
23rd.
because we just
Thank you, sir.
confirmed then that meeting is being moved to the 23rd instead of the 24th. So yes, for the purposes of advertising, enough time to advertise. Best date for a public hearing for this, well, actually for the next 4 items, will be the 23rd meeting. So your motion is to receive and file the communication and set the public hearing for the December 23rd meeting.
Yes, sir.
Is there a second? Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Are we going to have to also verbalize the rest of the communications, or is that going to cover all of them?
They're all different topics.
Okay, perfect, thank you. That
So
answers my question.
we will actually have 5 public hearings at the December 23rd.
Thank you.
Council
Thank you.
meeting.
But I would just, Mr. President.
Yes.
Yeah, I think any council member, though, when she starts reading that letter, can just interrupt her and make a motion to
Yeah.
do it as if read and schedule a public hearing, so she doesn't have to read that letter 5 times. So,
You can do it.
Never did that for you.
Right, I had to read them all. No, I'm kidding.
It's okay.
Sam's gonna do it. She's ready.
Thank you.
So if someone does want to make that motion for communications number 7 through 10, Mrs. Bowling.
I would like to move that we receive and file as read the communications.
Actually, we have to call the roll on this one first.
Oh, my God. Please do.
The motion on the floor by Mr. Braden, seconded by Mrs. Hoover, is to receive and file a communication and set the public hearing for the December 23rd meeting. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce, I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Mrs. Bowling.
Sorry for getting ahead of myself. I would like to make a motion that we receive and file communications 7 through 10 as if read and schedule a public hearing for each on December 23rd.
All right, motion by Mrs. Bowling is to receive and file communications 7 through 10 as if read and scheduling the public hearing for December 23rd for each of those items.
Mr. President,
Yes.
could you read the reline for each one of those separately so that we at
Yes,
least know what
sorry.
the topics are?
Yes, so communication 7 is a letter from the Norwood Planning Commission regarding expanding the existing PUD. Communication number 8 is the preliminary PUD for Phase 2. Communication 9 is the final PUD Phase 2. Communication number 10 is placing the PUD at South 4500 Beach Street. Was there a second to that motion? Mrs. Hoover,
I'll second.
any discussion? Motion on the floor by Mrs. Bowling, seconded by Mrs. Hoover, is to receive and file communications 7 through 10 as if read and scheduling the public hearing for those items for December the 23rd. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce, I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to communication 11. And that is an email from Carrie Town. Right, just do that portion.
Just this one?
Yep.
Hello, I forgot to send this one from Planning Commission to Council. I will send the official letter and document up as soon as I can, but could Council please set a public hearing for the ordinance below? An ordinance amending Part 11, Planning and Zoning Code relating to smoking, chewing, electronic smoking, vaping, retail product establishments to promote clarity and consistency in policy interpretation, and by directing these types of retail business establishments to appropriate locations and other related changes.
Thank you. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Motion to receive and file the communication and schedule a public hearing
For
for
December
the
23rd.
December 23rd.
Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion?
That's going to be a good meeting.
Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce, I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. We do have one absent member. Mrs. Bowling.
I move that we excuse Mrs. Franzen as she was on a pre-planned vacation. Work trip, work vacation, conference. It's warm there, so it feels like vacation.
sure made it sound like she was ready to go.
Yeah, Phoenix.
Is there a second? Mr. Garten.
I second the motion.
Seconded by Mr. Garten. Sounds like we already had the discussion. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce, I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Mr. Braden,
A motion to adjourn.
is there a second? Mrs. Bowling,
I'll second.
seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Call the roll, please.
Sorry. Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce, I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present, the motion carries. This meeting is hereby adjourned.